I've been insulted before, called a hick, a hayseed, even country trash. But nothing cut as deep as hearing my own daughter, on her wedding day, look me dead in the eyes and say, "Dad, I think it's better if you don't come inside at all. I don't want you there." She didn't cry when she said it. She didn't hesitate. She just adjusted her fancy white dress, gave a quick glance toward her husband's father, and smiled like she'd just done something graceful. If you're into real-life stories that'll make you feel something, the kind where karma doesn't just knock, it kicks the door in, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the rest of this one. You're going to want to hear how it ends. I stood there in my best suit, the one I pull out maybe twice a decade, holding a small wooden box. Inside was the letter I'd written her for this day and the check that would have been the biggest gift she'd ever receive. My chest felt like it was caving in. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't even ask her why. I just nodded, turned around, and walked back to my truck. As I left, I could feel eyes burning into my back, and I knew exactly whose they were. Her husband's father and his perfectly polished wife, the ones who'd been treating me like a stain on their perfect little picture since the engagement. The drive home was a blur. I remember the crunch of gravel under my tires as I pulled up to the farmhouse. I remember the heavy silence inside, the kind that sits on your shoulders. Then I went to my bedroom, opened the bottom drawer of my dresser, and pulled out a dusty brown envelope. Inside was the savings account I'd been building since the day she was born. Birthdays, Christmas bonuses, selling off tools I didn't want to sell, all of it went into that account. Over the years, it had grown into a sum big enough to buy a house, clear debt, or give someone the kind of start in life most people only dream of. Those savings had always been hers in my mind. Always. But that night, staring at that envelope, I felt something break inside me. I drove into town, walked into the bank, and closed the account. The teller, a kid who used to help me stack hay bales one summer, asked if I wanted a cashier's check. No, I said. Cash. When he handed it over, I folded the stacks neatly, tucked them into my jacket, and stepped out into the cool night air. It wasn't just about the money anymore. That night I realized something. Respect is a currency too. And my own daughter had just told me I was worth nothing. Well, if that's how she wanted to play it, fine. But I wasn't going to disappear quietly. I was going to make sure she, and every smug face at that wedding, understood exactly what they'd thrown away. And under the flickering streetlight outside that bank, I made a decision I never thought I would. She wasn't getting that money. Not a cent. Instead, I'd use it to teach her a lesson. Not out of spite. Not out of hate. But because she needed to learn, and I was the only one willing to teach her. What I didn't know that night was just how far this lesson would reach, or how much it would cost her perfect new life. The night after the wedding, I barely slept. I just sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee that went cold hours ago, staring at the cash on the table. Every stack was a memory. That $50 bill came from selling my old Winchester rifle, the one my father gave me, because she needed a laptop for college. That $100 stack? From the time I worked double shifts during harvest season, even when pneumonia had me coughing so hard I thought my ribs would snap. The thick bundle in the middle? That was from selling my second tractor, the one I loved more than my first, because tuition fees kept going up. Every dollar on that table was a piece of me. Years of sweat, broken bones, and sleepless nights. And the thought that she could look at me like I was some embarrassment, well, that was the kind of wound that doesn't heal easy. I remember when she was little, she used to run around the farm in her overalls, hair in a messy ponytail, helping me feed the chickens and calling me the best dad in the world. Somewhere along the way, that little girl disappeared. It started when she went to college in the city. She'd come home for holidays wearing expensive clothes I knew she couldn't afford, talking about networking and branding like she was already too good for our way of life. At first, I thought it was just part of growing up. Then she started making little comments. Dad, maybe you shouldn't wear those old boots when we go out. Or, people from my program wouldn't understand farm life. Then she met him. Mr. Perfect. His dad, my now sworn enemy, owned a chain of car dealerships. His mom was the kind of woman who looked you up and down before she decided how fake her smile should be. From the first dinner, I knew they didn't like me. His father asked about my real job, even after I told him the farm had been in our family for 3 generations. His mother asked if I'd ever traveled abroad, not out of curiosity, but to see if she could box me into her neat little category of uncultured. After that, every family event felt like an audition I was failing. I'd catch them exchanging glances whenever I spoke, like my words were something they needed to politely endure. And my daughter, she started echoing them, correcting the way I spoke, rolling her eyes when I told old farm stories. The final straw came 2 weeks before the wedding. We were at a dinner at their house, and her future father-in-law made a joke, right in front of me, about how, at least she's marrying up. My daughter laughed. She actually laughed. I told myself then and there that I'd never forget it. Now, sitting in my kitchen with the stacks of cash, I felt the old me, the one who'd work himself half to death for family, start to fade. In his place was a man who was ready to make sure they learned something they'd never forget. I didn't have the full plan yet, but I knew 2 things. First, they cared about appearances more than anything. Second, they thought I was powerless. That was going to be my advantage. The first move was to make sure they didn't see me coming. No angry phone calls. No confrontations. Just silence. Silence makes people nervous, especially people who expect you to grovel. While they were sipping champagne on their honeymoon, I started talking to people in town. Not gossiping, just listening. The banker who handled their accounts. The realtor who'd been showing properties to her husband's family. The guy who worked at the local supply store who always seemed to know who was behind on their bills. And that's when I started hearing things, interesting things. Not everything in their perfect world was as stable as it looked. I didn't know it yet, but those little whispers were going to become the foundation of my revenge. For the next few days after the wedding, I kept my head down. I didn't answer calls from my daughter, didn't return texts. Not that she sent many. I think she assumed I was sulking somewhere with a bottle, too embarrassed to face the world. Let her think that. In reality, I was moving. Slowly, quietly, deliberately. First order of business, secure the money. The cash I'd pulled from the bank was locked in my safe for now, but I didn't want it just sitting there. Money has a way of disappearing when it's idle, through temptation, accidents, or worse. So I split it. Half went straight into upgrading my farm, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to make the place bulletproof. New fencing, fresh gravel for the driveway, a top-of-the-line security system with cameras on every gate and barn. I even replaced the old weather-worn sign at the entrance with one carved from oak, my family name etched deep into the wood. I wanted anyone driving by to see it and remember that this land wasn't just dirt, it was legacy. The other half, well, that was my war chest. I didn't have a complete plan yet, but I knew I needed resources ready to move at a moment's notice. I opened a small, separate account in another bank 2 towns over, under the name of my old defunct LLC. Nothing that would raise eyebrows, just enough to make sure no one, especially my daughter or her in-laws, could trace it back to me easily. Then came the listening. I spent afternoons at the diner where the town's business owners liked to gather. I lingered longer at the hardware store, chatting with folks I hadn't seen in years. And every time her husband's father's name came up, I leaned in just enough to catch the tone of the conversation. The more I listened, the more cracks I saw in their shiny facade. The car dealership chain wasn't doing as hot as they liked to pretend. A new competitor had opened up in the next county, offering better deals and newer models. Sales were slipping, and the only thing keeping them ahead was a planned expansion, one that would require a very specific piece of land. I knew that land. I owned that land. I didn't let on to anyone, of course. Farmers know how to keep a straight face. But inside, I was already weighing my options. That property had been mine for years, passed down from my uncle, and I'd always thought I might sell it one day if the price was right. But now it wasn't just dirt. It was leverage. And leverage, in the right hands, is power. In the evenings, I started making quiet calls. I reconnected with an old friend who worked in property development, asked him hypothetical questions about zoning, permits, and potential buyers. He didn't need to know the real reason yet. I just wanted to understand the playing field. I also reached out to the local banker, the same one who'd hinted at trouble for my daughter's new husband, and asked a few harmless-sounding questions about interest rates and loan approvals. He mentioned, almost in passing, that the dealership expansion loan hadn't been finalized yet. That meant they were vulnerable. The best part? They didn't know I knew. So I kept my smile friendly and my tone casual, all while filing away every little piece of intel. My daughter and her in-laws were off in their own world, planning charity luncheons and posting perfect Instagram photos. They had no idea that out here, in the quiet hum of the countryside, I was laying the first stones of a path that would lead straight to their downfall. And the beauty of it was, I wasn't rushing. Farmers know patience. You plant seeds, you water them, and you wait. Because when the time is right, the harvest can change everything. It happened faster than I expected. 2 weeks after the wedding, I was in town early to pick up feed when I ran into Mike, the loan officer at the bank. Mike's the kind of guy who likes to talk, but he's also smart enough not to spill more than he should. That morning, though, he had a certain look on his face, the one people get when they know something juicy. "Hey," he said, leaning a little closer over the counter. "You hear about the newlyweds?" I shrugged, like I hadn't thought about them in days. "Nope. Why?" Mike smiled in that way bankers do when they think they're being discreet. "Let's just say the honeymoon ended earlier than planned. Word is, the big investment your son-in-law was counting on fell through. Hard." I played dumb, but inside I felt a slow burn of satisfaction. "Yeah," Mike went on, lowering his voice, "some deal with a dealership supplier in Dallas. Bank was supposed to back part of it, but the numbers didn't look right. Pulled the plug." I thanked him, made my purchase, and walked out into the crisp morning air. My boots crunched on the gravel, but all I could hear was the sound of opportunity knocking. Now, a normal father might have called his daughter to check on her, make sure she was okay. But I wasn't playing the normal father anymore. She had chosen her side, and so had I. Instead, I made sure a few whispers about financial trouble started to drift through town. Not from me directly, of course. Farmers know better than to leave fingerprints. I just made sure the right people overheard the right comments. A nod here, a casual mention there. The beauty of small towns is that once the wind catches a rumor, it carries it everywhere. And the best part? I made sure the whispers didn't point at me. If anyone traced them back, it would look like the trouble came straight from her in-laws' side. A few days later, I saw my daughter in the grocery store. She looked different, still had her fancy clothes and polished hair, but there was a tightness in her smile, a stiffness in her posture. She spotted me near the produce section and froze for half a second before giving a small, awkward wave. I just nodded and went back to picking out apples. No small talk, no questions. Just enough coldness for her to feel it. She lingered nearby, pretending to browse, but I could see her watching me. Finally, she walked over and tried to sound casual. "Hey, Dad, how's the farm?" "Thriving," I said simply, without looking up. Then I turned to leave, pushing my cart past her. That little exchange told me more than any gossip could. She was fishing, not because she cared about me, but because something in her new world was already shaking. The following weekend, I heard from an old friend who works at the country club. He told me her husband's father had been in a heated conversation over the phone in the club's lobby, pacing back and forth. Apparently, the word foreclosure had come up more than once. If that was true, their problems were bigger than just a bad investment. And if there's one thing I know about people like them, it's that when money troubles hit, their perfect social image starts to crumble fast. I didn't need to push harder yet. The first crack had appeared, and cracks have a way of spreading all on their own. All I had to do was keep listening, keep watching, and be ready for the moment when a well-timed nudge could turn that crack into a full collapse. And believe me, that moment was coming. The invitation came in the mail the following week, a glossy card with gold trim, inviting me to the annual Harvest Charity Dinner. It's a big deal in our county. Local business owners, politicians, the mayor, all dressed to the nines, pretending they care about rural issues while sipping overpriced wine. Normally, I'd toss it straight in the trash. But this year was different. Because I knew who would be there. Her husband's family never missed it. It was one of those events where they could show off their community involvement without actually doing any of the hard work. Perfect place for them to network, to be seen, to keep up the illusion that everything in their world was perfect. And me? I had a role to play. I pulled out my one good suit again, the same one I'd worn to the wedding, the suit she'd thought wasn't good enough. I gave it a proper clean, polished my boots until they shined, and showed up right on time. The dinner was being held in the banquet hall at the county fairgrounds. White tablecloths, chandeliers rented for the night, and the smell of catered prime rib in the air. I scanned the room as I walked in. Sure enough, there they were, her husband's father, holding court at a table near the front, surrounded by the usual crowd of small-town big shots. I didn't go straight over. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I mingled, shook hands, asked about families, crops, weather. And then, when the moment was right, I dropped my first hint. It was subtle, just a casual comment to an old neighbor who happened to own a farm supply store. Thinking about selling that back field of mine, I said, sipping my drink. Got some interest from folks out of state. Not sure yet, though. Could be they'll make me an offer I can't refuse. I could feel the shift immediately. People here know land. They know its value. And they know who might be interested in certain parcels. I didn't need to say it outright. Anyone paying attention could connect the dots. Sure enough, not 10 minutes later, I caught her husband's father glancing in my direction. I kept moving, talking to the mayor, to the head of the local co-op. Each time, I worked in a variation of the same line, that I might sell, that there was serious outside interest, and that I'd be making a decision soon. Always just vague enough to avoid sounding like I was pitching. By dessert, I'd accidentally found myself near their table. He gave me a polite nod, the kind that says, "I've been hearing about you all night." I returned it with the most harmless farmer's smile I could muster. We didn't speak, not yet. I wanted the seed to take root first. I wanted him lying awake that night wondering if I was bluffing and who exactly I might be talking to. Before I left, I made one more stop, a quick word with the county zoning officer, just loud enough for anyone nearby to overhear. "Yeah," I said. "If I do sell, I'll have to make sure the buyer can work with current zoning. Wouldn't want them wasting money if the county won't approve their plans." Her husband's father didn't flinch, but I saw the way his jaw tightened. That was all I needed for the night. I'd come in as just another face in the crowd, and I was leaving as the man who might hold the key to his expansion dreams, or the man who might hand that key to someone else. Either way, the game had started, and I was holding the first card. It didn't take long. 3 days after the charity dinner, my phone rang while I was out in the barn fixing a loose hinge on one of the stalls. The caller ID lit up with a name I recognized immediately, the dealership office. I wiped my hands on a rag and answered. "Hello, Mr. Thompson?" The voice on the other end was smooth, practiced, the kind of tone used by men who've spent decades making deals over golf. "This is Robert Hayes. I believe you know my son and my new daughter-in-law." I let there be a long pause before answering. "I do. I was wondering if you might have time to meet. I hear you've been considering selling a piece of property, and I thought we might discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement." Oh, there it was. No small talk. No pretending this was a friendly check-in. Straight to business. "I'm busy this week," I said, "and I'm not sure I'm ready to sell yet." "Well," he said, chuckling in that fake friendly way, "sometimes the best deals happen before a decision is made. Perhaps I can make it worth your while to choose sooner rather than later." He suggested lunch at the nicest steakhouse in the county. I agreed, not because I wanted to, but because I knew a man like Robert Hayes didn't invite you to lunch unless he was prepared to open his wallet, and I wanted to see exactly what he thought my land and my silence were worth. 2 days later, I walked into that restaurant wearing my best boots and a freshly pressed shirt. He was already there, seated in a corner booth, sipping something that cost more than my monthly electric bill. We exchanged the usual pleasantries, ordered our food, and then he leaned forward. "Let's talk numbers," he said, like we were already in the middle of the deal. "That backfield of yours. I can offer you fair market value, plus a little extra to save us both some time." I raised an eyebrow. "Fair market value, huh? And how exactly are you determining that?" He rattled off an amount. It was decent, for anyone desperate to sell. But I wasn't desperate. "That's a nice offer," I said, leaning back. "But I've had interest from out-of-state buyers willing to pay more. Folks who might want to use the land for something different." His smile didn't falter, but I could see the flicker in his eyes. "Different how?" I shrugged. "Maybe storage facilities. Maybe a distribution center. I hear those can be profitable." He set his glass down a little harder than necessary. "Those kinds of developments would ruin the character of that area." I smiled. "Guess it depends on whose character we're talking about." The rest of lunch was polite, but the undercurrent was tense. He tried sweetening the deal twice, each time adding just enough to make it seem generous, but not enough to make me bite. When we parted ways, I shook his hand and told him I'd think about it. What I didn't say was that I'd already made up my mind. I wasn't selling to him at any price. But I wanted him chasing me. I wanted him to feel the clock ticking. And most importantly, I wanted him to start making mistakes. Because in business, and in revenge, Desperation is the sharpest tool you can use. The invitation to the auction went out a week later. Now, I didn't make it public. This wasn't some free-for-all where anyone could wander in. No, this was an invitation-only sale, one that I'd carefully curated with just the right mix of local land developers, out-of-town investors, and a few big names from neighboring counties who had the money and the appetite to buy. I made sure the guest list would circulate quietly, not enough to hit the newspapers, but enough that the people I wanted to hear about it would hear about it. And sure enough, it didn't take long before I got confirmation that the Hayeses, my daughter's new in-laws, knew all about it. The morning of the auction, I stood on my porch sipping coffee, watching trucks and SUVs roll down the long gravel drive to my property. I'd set up the barn for the occasion, polished floors, fresh paint, long tables for paperwork, and even a catering spread in the corner. Everything looked professional, serious, final. Around 10 a.m., I saw them, my daughter and her husband, stepping out of a sleek black SUV. She was dressed to impress, in a way that felt almost strategic. He wore that same smug look I'd seen at the wedding, the kind of expression that said he thought he was already the smartest man in the room. I greeted the other guests first, deliberately taking my time before making my way to them. "Dad," she said, putting on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We heard about the auction. Thought we'd stop by, see what's going on." "Is that right?" I said, keeping my tone light. Her husband jumped in. "We just wanted to make sure you're getting fair offers. You know, sometimes these developers can take advantage of folks." I almost laughed. Developers weren't the ones I was worried about. "Well, I appreciate the concern," I said, "but I've got plenty of interest. In fact, I expect I'll have a deal by the end of the day." I watched their faces closely. His jaw tightened. She tried to keep her expression neutral, but there was a flicker of something, worry. They hung around as the auction began, hovering near the coffee table, pretending to mingle. I knew exactly why they were there. Her husband's father had sent them to feel me out, maybe even to talk me into some kind of family-first deal before the bidding got serious. Sure enough, halfway through, my daughter pulled me aside. "Dad, look, I know things have been tense, but maybe we could talk? Just you and me." I raised an eyebrow. "About the land, you mean?" She hesitated, then nodded. It would mean a lot to us if it stayed in the family. You know?" I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "Respect is part of family, too, and it's worth more than money. But when you throw it away, well, that's a lesson that costs." She blinked, like she didn't quite understand, but I could see her processing it. When the final bids came in, I made it clear I'd be reviewing offers over the next few days, and that some of the strongest ones were from out of state. I didn't have to say who. Let them stew on it. As they left, her husband's hand was tight on her arm. They didn't say goodbye. That was fine. The point wasn't to sell the land that day. The point was to remind them, in front of people they respected, that I had options, that I could choose who got the keys to their future. And the beauty of it? They couldn't stop me. I didn't make them wait long. 3 days after the auction, I signed the papers. Not with Robert Hayes, of course. No, I sold that land to a developer from 2 counties over. A sharp, no-nonsense woman named Linda Carter who had been circling this area for years, looking for the right foothold. Linda didn't care about community image or keeping the character of the area. She cared about profitable projects, and she was damn good at making them happen fast. When I told her she had the deal, she grinned. "You're gonna make some folks real happy," she said. "And some folks real mad," I replied. Within 48 hours, the surveyors were on site, marking boundaries and taking measurements. Big white trucks with logos parked along the roadside, impossible to miss for anyone driving by. And this land, it sat right between the Hayes dealership and the only access road they could use for expansion. The development plans weren't public yet, but I already knew. Once Linda broke ground, their dreams of adding more showrooms and service bays would be dead in the water. The beauty of it all was that I never had to say a word to them directly. The message was written in the tire tracks of those survey trucks and the fresh stakes driven into the dirt. But I wasn't done. See, people in small towns talk. And with the right nudge, they talk louder. So I happened to stop by the feed store and mention, loud enough for a couple of the regulars to hear, that I'd gotten a great offer for my land, and that the buyers are planning something big. I didn't say what. Of course, letting their imaginations run wild was part of the fun. By the next day, I overheard two different versions of the story at the diner. In one, it was going to be a massive storage facility. In another, a trucking hub that would bring heavy traffic right past the dealership. Both stories had one thing in common. They were bad news for the Hayeses. A week later, I saw Robert Hayes himself outside the courthouse. He spotted me and strode over, trying to keep his voice level. "You sold it," he said flatly. "I did," I replied. "To who?" "Buyers Confidential," I said, smiling just enough to make sure he knew I was enjoying this. His jaw tightened. "You've made a mistake. That property's going to ruin the flow of traffic to the whole area." I shrugged. "Guess that depends on what you consider ruin. From where I'm standing, it looks like progress." He didn't reply, just turned and walked off, his shoulders stiff. By the end of that month, the local paper ran a short piece about proposed development on County Road 12. They didn't mention me by name, but everyone knew whose land it had been. And just like that, the whispers about Hayes' family troubles grew louder. As far as the community was concerned, I hadn't done anything wrong. I'd simply sold my property to a willing buyer. But the people who mattered, the Hayeses and my daughter, knew exactly what it meant. Their perfect little empire had just lost its next chapter. And I was the one holding the pen. The invitation came from the town council, the annual winter fundraiser at the community hall. It was the kind of event where half the county shows up, whether they care about the cause or not. For some, it's about charity. For others, it's about being seen. I knew the Hayeses would be there. People like them never skip a chance to polish their image in front of the community. And I knew my daughter would be there too, standing at their table, smiling for photos, pretending she belonged to a perfect family. I wasn't planning on making a scene, but I was ready for one if it came to me. When I walked into the hall, I could feel the shift in the air. Conversations dipped for just a moment, enough for me to notice. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't avoiding them. I was walking in with my head high, wearing my best jacket, shaking hands and greeting old friends. Sure enough, I spotted them across the room. My daughter caught my eye, froze for half a second, then put on that practiced smile. I gave her a nod and moved on. It happened about an hour into the night. The auctioneer had just finished the last round of charity bids, and people were milling about, chatting, laughing. That's when my daughter approached me, and not quietly. "Dad," she said, her voice just a little too loud. "Can we talk?" The crowd around us shifted, curious. I kept my tone calm. "Of course. What's on your mind?" She hesitated, glancing at her husband and his parents standing just a few steps away. I don't understand why you've been so distant. We're family. We should be able to work things out." I could feel the weight of a dozen eyes on us. This was my moment. Not to yell, not to get angry, but to lay out the truth so plainly that it couldn't be twisted. "You want to know why?" I said. "Let me tell you. On your wedding day, my gift to you was a letter and a check, the largest gift I could have ever given you. Money I'd been saving since the day you were born. And before the ceremony even started, you looked me in the eye and told me not to come inside, because I didn't fit the image you wanted." The room went quiet. No music, no clinking glasses, just silence. "You told me I was an embarrassment. In front of your new family. After I spent my life making sure you had every chance you needed to succeed." Her face went pale. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I turned slightly, addressing not just her, but the crowd that had formed around us. "I didn't sell my land to spite anyone. I sold it because I realized something that day. Respect is worth more than money. And if someone doesn't value you, you don't owe them a damn thing." From the corner of my eye, I saw Robert Hayes shift uncomfortably. His wife stared at the floor. People were whispering now, not in my direction, but in theirs. My daughter tried to speak again, but I shook my head. "You made your choice. Now I've made mine. I'm at peace with it. And you should be too, because this is the world you chose to live in." I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't have to. The truth was heavy enough to carry itself. I stepped away, leaving her standing there in front of her friends, her husband, and half the town. The picture of someone whose perfect life had just been cracked wide open. And for the first time in months, I felt lighter. In the weeks after the fundraiser, things got quiet. Not the tense, watch your back kind of quiet, but the kind that comes when the storm has passed and you realize you're still standing. The Hayeses stopped showing up at every public event. My daughter's Instagram turned from perfectly staged dinners and designer outfits to pictures of her dog and the occasional nature walk, like she was trying to reset her image. I didn't comment. I didn't reach out. Instead, I poured my energy into the farm. With the money from the sale, I finished upgrading equipment, hired an extra hand for the heavy work, and finally fixed the old barn roof that had been leaking since last winter. I started selling at new markets, meeting people from outside the county, and even got invited to speak at a regional farming conference about sustainable practices. For the first time in years, I wasn't living with a weight on my shoulders. I didn't feel like I had to prove myself to anyone. And I sure as hell wasn't waiting for an invitation to sit at someone's table. One Saturday morning, I was at the local farmer's market when a young couple stopped by my stand. They were just starting their own small farm and wanted advice. We talked for an hour about soil quality, crop rotation, the ups and downs of rural life. As they walked away, I realized I'd found something better than revenge, the chance to pass on what I knew to people who actually valued it. Do I miss my daughter? Of course. She's my blood. But I've learned that you can love someone and still walk away when they treat you like you're less than. And maybe one day, she'll understand that too. Until then, I'll keep living my life. Proud, steady, and unapologetic. So that's my story. Now I've got a question for you. Did I do the right thing? And if you were in my boots, what would you have done? If you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Hit that like button to let me know you want more, and drop a comment with your thoughts. I read every single one.